Whenever you watch a political interview, there are really two conversations happening at the same time. There's the one you hear, the talking points, the policy positions. But then there's the one you see, the story told by the body. Today, we're going to dig into an analysis of a really fascinating interview with Senator Marco Rubio and see what happens when those two stories just don't seem to match up.
So let's start with the central question this whole analysis is built around. What if all those little ticks, those subtle shifts in posture, aren't just random noise? What if they're actually signals, clues to a huge, hidden shift in American foreign policy? A pivot toward a war that's much older and, frankly, much stranger than we could possibly imagine.
But before we get to that hidden story, we've got to understand the one that's right there on the surface. So first, let's just break down what Senator Rubio actually said about three really key topics: Iran, Venezuela, and, well, unidentified anomalous phenomena, or UAPs.
When it comes to Iran, Rubio's message is laser-focused. He lays out this strategy of very precise, very limited military force. The goal isn't some long, drawn-out war or nation-building. Nope, it's about identifying an existential threat, in this case a nuclear facility, and just taking it out. A clean, surgical strike, in and out.
And then he takes that same threat and brings it right to our doorstep. Rubio makes the case that Venezuela isn't just some failed state. He calls it a narco regime that's essentially a forward operating base for Iran, right here in the Western Hemisphere. So for him, these aren't separate issues. They're all connected and getting closer and closer to home.
And then you get this bombshell. When he's asked about the UAP disclosures, Rubio straight up confirms that, yeah, there are secret programs out there operating totally outside of presidential oversight. You're going to want to hang on to this quote because according to this analysis, it's the key that unlocks a much, much deeper interpretation of everything else he says.
Okay, so that's the story he told with his words. Now let's get to the story his body was telling, based on a really detailed nonverbal analysis of the interview. And this is where things start to get really weird, because a massive contrast starts to pop up. What the analysis zeroes in on is this huge shift in his whole vibe. When he's talking about the threats from Iran and Venezuela, he comes across one way. But the second the conversation turns to the war in Ukraine, his body language seems to be telling a completely different tale. When he's discussing Iran and Venezuela, you can just feel the confidence. He's physically expansive, he takes up space, his posture is upright, he's using these powerful, emphatic, chopping hand gestures to really drive his points home, and he holds that strong, direct eye contact. That's the body language of somebody who 100% believes what they're saying. But it's like a switch flips when the topic moves to Ukraine. The analysis points out that his whole physical presence just kind of shrinks. His hands, which were open and strong before, are suddenly clasped tight, which is a classic stress signal. The source even notes things like eye blocking, looking away, and this one's a big one, shaking his head no while he's verbally saying something positive. These are all potential red flags for, well, if not outright deception, then at least some serious discomfort.
So what on earth could that mean? Why be so confident on one front and then so visibly uncomfortable on another? Well, this is where the source analysis takes a huge leap and offers a pretty dramatic theory for what's really happening behind the curtain.
The core of the theory is something the source calls hemisphere realism. The idea is that what we're witnessing is the beginning of a massive strategic withdrawal. America is pulling back from its role as the world's policeman, especially in Europe, to basically circle the wagons, fortify the Americas, and get ready for a much more fundamental, existential fight right here at home. And this really lays out the two fronts of this new strategy. The theory goes that Rubio's discomfort with Ukraine comes from the fact that he's covering up a managed retreat, basically getting out of what the source calls a territorial dispute on a sinking ship. But his confidence on Iran, that signals where the real fight is. A fight against what the source calls evil, and it's a fight that won't be won with occupations, but with those targeted, decisive strikes he was talking about.
But hold on, because the rabbit hole goes even deeper. This interpretation connects everything back to that weird interview headline and Rubio's shocking admission about UAPs. It reframes the whole thing.
So, on the surface, that headline is about Venezuela's leader, Maduro. Simple enough. But the source analysis asks a really provocative question. What if this is just projection? What if it's hinting at a much, much bigger deal? A more fundamental contract that's been broken?
Okay, let's walk through the logic here. It's kind of a three-step chain reaction. First, you have Rubio confirming these secret programs exist, totally outside the democratic chain of command. Second, the source argues that this means the constitutional contract, the deal between the government and its people, is effectively null and void. And what does that point to? Well, speculatively, it hints at some kind of hidden, unelected power structure that's been operating in the shadows, possibly with access to ancient or even non-human technology.
So, the grand conclusion of this analysis is that this whole strategic pivot, ditching old alliances, focusing on our own hemisphere, is really about a return to core American principles. A kind of back-to-basics realism focused on just plain self-preservation. It's a strategy to fortify the homeland and get ready for a confrontation with whatever these hidden forces are that have broken the ultimate deal.
Which leaves us with a pretty mind-bending question, doesn't it? Is this just a really insightful breakdown of political body language? A masterclass in reading between the lines? Or, as the source speculates, are we actually catching a glimpse through these little cracks, a peek into a reality that is fundamentally stranger than we can even begin to imagine? The answer, well, it just might be hiding in plain sight.